Called to order. My name is Yvonne Daly, and I am a member of the Environmental Management Commission. I have been designated as the hearing officer for the 15A NCAC 2L.0202 Groundwater Quality Standards rulemaking effort. If you are having technical difficulties with WebEx, you can use the chat feature in WebEx to ask questions or seek assistance. You can also view the public announcement for this hearing, which is a link on the Department of Environmental Quality's Public Notices and Hearings website for instructions on various ways to connect to WebEx and for the WebEx phone number and access code for this hearing. This hearing is being held under the authority of North Carolina General Statutes, Chapter 150B-21.2. In accordance with the general statutes, a public notice of this hearing was published in the January 15, 2021 edition of the North Carolina Register. Notice to the public was also provided through the division's website, and a press release was issued by the Division of Water Resources on January 15, 2021. The purpose of today's hearing is to obtain public comment on the proposed amendments to the regulations governing groundwater quality standards and its fiscal analysis. In a moment, Bridget Shelton, a Division of Water Resources staff member, will review this proposal for you. There is additional information available on the Department of Environmental Quality's Public Notices and Hearings webpage that describes the proposal. A written record of this hearing will be prepared that will include all the relevant comments, questions, and discussions. For this reason, the hearing is being recorded. Written comments received by March 16, 2021 will also be included in the record. Based on the public comments received by March 16 and input and review of the comments by myself and the Division of Water Resources staff, I will make a recommendation to the Environmental Management Commission after the record is complete. In making the final decision, the Environmental Management Commission will consider the written record, the recommendations of division staff, the recommendations of the hearing officer, and any concerns of other commission members. The recommendation for the proposed rule may be to adopt it as proposed or to adopt a modified version of the proposal. The Environmental Management Commission may adopt the recommendation, modify it, or reject it. If the Commission wishes to adopt a rule that differs substantially from what has been published in the North Carolina Register and proposed this evening, it must first publish the text of the proposed different rule and accept comments on the new text. Now, Bridget Shelton will present a brief overview of the proposed rule changes. After Bridget's presentation, comments from the audience will be allowed. Bridget?
Thank you, Commissioner Bailey. Good evening. I'm Bridget Shelton, the Groundwater Standards Coordinator with the Classifications and Standards Rules Review Branch in the Division of Water Resources. I'm here today to present the proposed changes to 15A and CAC 02L 0202 groundwater quality standards. Okay. So first, a brief overview of North Carolina groundwater quality standards. These are the maximum allowable concentrations of contaminants in groundwater, which may be tolerated without creating a threat to human health, or which would otherwise render the groundwater unsuitable for its intended best use. The best usage of groundwater is defined in rule as an existing or potential source of drinking water for humans. These groundwater standards protect the groundwaters of the state as a resource for human consumption. They are used and implemented in many different programs, including site cleanups, risk assessments, health evaluations, including private well health evaluations. Where groundwater quality has been degraded, the goal of any required corrective action is to restore the resource to the level of the standards or as closely as possible. Groundwater standards are not a federal program, and they are done at the state level using the rule listed to the left here, 15A NCAC 02L.0202. They protect the human adult population, and they target ingestion and household use. The endpoints used when establishing these standards include non-cancer endpoints, cancer and aqueous taste and odor thresholds. When a groundwater standard has not yet been established for a substance, any person may petition the director of DWR to establish an IMAC. These are designed as temporary standards that are done at the director level to ensure that an accurate and health protective value can be established in a shorter timeline than the rulemaking process. Keep in mind, when there is no standard or IMAC for a substance, that substance is not allowed at levels above the practical quantitation limit, or PQL. The PQL means the lowest concentration of a given material that can be reliably achieved among laboratories during routine laboratory analysis. It is a laboratory value, not a health-based value. The rule lays out how a petitioner may request an IMAC, which includes the submission of relevant toxicity and epidemiological data and calculations. Staff then evaluates whether the data is appropriate for the development of an IMAC. IMACs are calculated using the same process and references as groundwater standards, following the procedures which are outlined in the O2L.0202 rule. As it states in subsection G of the rule, both groundwater quality standards and interim maximum allowable concentrations, or IMACs, are to be reviewed on a triennial basis. This periodic review is done to make sure the values are up to date and that we have accounted for any new toxicological information that may have been published or updated since these standards and IMACs were last established. This last review by DWR staff focused on the IMACs that we currently have. DWR considered any new or updated information in accordance with the rule. Staff considered if appropriate modifications were needed, and reports of the reviews were prepared and reviewed internally. These reports were then sent to toxicology staff at Division of Waste Management and DHHS, or Department of Health and Human Services, for review and comment. DWR is proposing amendments to 15A NCAC 02L 0202 as a result of this last periodic review of the IMACs. DWR is recommending the incorporation of 44 existing IMACs into groundwater quality standards. Revised values for a number of compounds that I will list later are recommended based on new data or recalculations and re-examinations of existing data. Otherwise, the values that we are recommending be incorporated into the rule do not change from existing IMAC values. DWR is also proposing the addition of a groundwater quality standard for 3 compounds which do not currently have IMACs. As a result of the review process, we do recommend establishing a groundwater standard for these compounds listed here: 2,6-dinitrotoluene, strontium, and total PFOA and PFOS. Here is a list of the compounds for which we are proposing revisions from their current IMAC values due to the new data, recalculations, and re-examinations of existing data. The listed here: acetochlor ESA, acetochlor OXA, allichlor, N-butanol, 2,4-dinitrotoluene, diphenyl ether, total PFOA and PFOS, thallium, and vanadium. More information on these proposed values, including the references used and calculations performed to arrive at these values, can be found on our website, which will be listed on the last slide of this presentation. It is also important to note that we do currently have an IMAC value for PFOA of 2 micrograms per liter, but there is currently no IMAC for PFOS. We are recommending a groundwater standard of 0.07 micrograms per liter, or 70 parts per trillion, for the combined concentrations of PFOA and PFOS based on EPA Office of Water's 2016 Drinking Water Health Advisory. Moving on with more proposed rule text amendments, DWR is also recommending updates for clarifications and ease of use, including the addition of chemical abstract service registry numbers, organizing the standards into a table, reporting in uniform units when possible, and removing synonyms which would no longer be needed if these CAS numbers are included. These proposed amendments are to make it easier to locate the groundwater standards and to use the standards moving forward. Finally, DWR is recommending rule text revisions to 15A NCAC 02L 0202C to add an IMAC notification process, so the public will be notified when an IMAC has been requested and have the opportunity to comment before the director establishes the IMAC. DWR is also recommending rule text revisions to 15A NCAC 02L.0202G to clarify the triennial review process and procedure. For subsection C, the rule text revisions and additions are shown here in red. Most of these revisions here are for clarification. The added red text at the end clarifies the communication between DWR and the petitioner during the IMAC request. So if the petitioner does not submit the appropriate information in accordance with the rule, the director of DWR shall request additional information. If the petitioner does not provide this information, the petition for the IMAC will be denied. Following this paragraph is this proposed additional text to subsection C. So this is the proposed addition of the IMAC notification process based on a stakeholder request. When an IMAC has been requested for a substance, DWR will provide public notice at least 30 days before the establishment of an IMAC for this substance. This notice shall include the petition that DWR received, the level of the proposed IMAC, and the basis upon which DWR has relied on to develop this proposed IMAC. This notice will be published in the North Carolina Register and published on the website listed here. We also recommend this additional text at the end that states that once an IMAC has been established, it will be both posted on the website and the EMC will be noticed within 30 days. Here are the recommended revisions to subsection G. We are recommending these rule text revisions in red in order to clarify the triennial review process that DWR undertakes. These recommended text revisions add clarification on reporting the periodic review of the standards and IMACs to the Environmental Management Commission and add details on the actions the director shall take during the review of IMACs. So the director shall consider the following actions during the review of an established IMAC. 1, recommend codifying the IMAC as a groundwater quality standard under this rule. 2, update the IMAC value based on data published or rescinded subsequent to the previous review. 3, remove the IMAC based on data published or rescinded subsequent to the previous review. And 4, retain the IMAC at the current value. Any IMAC recommended under subparagraph G1 of this rule that the Commission does not codify shall remain an established IMAC and be reviewed during the next triennial review. Moving on to the fiscal analysis. By state law, rule changes require a regulatory impact analysis to be performed on the proposed changes. Our analysis was submitted and approved by OSBM in August of 2019. The regulatory impact analysis report can be found at the link listed at the end of the slide here. The analysis concludes that a net direct benefit to regulated entities can be expected because of cost savings from completing groundwater remediation in a shorter period of time, leading to operation and maintenance costs. A net direct benefit to state government can be due to savings to staff time and resources for DEQ and DOT. A zero to net positive indirect benefit for well water consumers and the environment can be expected due to remediation at more sites in the long term, resulting in improved compliance with the groundwater standards. Again, the full report can be found on our website listed at the bottom here. Here's information on how to submit written comments if needed. At the end, here's the link to our website, which also provides information on how to submit comments. And the bottom of that webpage has additional information, including the regulatory impact analysis report and supporting information, which has details and calculations for each proposed standard. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. The Environmental Management Commission wants to hear your comments on the proposed rule. All interested and potentially affected persons or parties are encouraged to make their opinion known to the Commission, whether in favor of or opposed to any or all provisions of the proposed rule. Please know that your comments are important and will enable the Commission to act in the best interest of the public. Please also remember that the intent of this hearing is to solicit your comments on the proposed amendments to the groundwater quality standards and associated fiscal analysis. It is important that you keep your comments concise and relevant to the proposal and fiscal analysis. It is critical that we have time to get all your comments on the proposal and its fiscal analysis, and we'll hear them first. Then, if you have other comments that you believe should be voiced to the staff or the hearing officer, We will try to give additional time at the end of the hearing for those comments, or you can contact staff after the hearing with those comments. We will now accept comments on the proposed rule from the audience. I will call on speakers in the order that you registered for this hearing. If you have joined the hearing by phone, press *3 to raise your hand. Speak once called upon to do so, and press *3 again to lower your hand. If you have joined the hearing online, press the hand icon to raise your hand. Speak once when called upon to do so, and press the hand icon again to lower your hand. The WebEx host will unmute each speaker when it is his or her turn to speak. I will also state the name of the next speaker in the queue so that individual can be prepared when his or her name is called to speak. Please do not start speaking until the WebEx host has indicated that your microphone has been unmuted. If I call your name but cannot hear you after you have been unmuted, please check to see if you are muted on the WebEx screen on your computer. If you are having audio issues, try a different method of audio connection with WebEx, or use the Call Me feature to have WebEx call your personal telephone line. If I still cannot hear you, I will proceed to the next registered speaker, but I will call your name again at the end of the hearing. When your name is called, please clearly and slowly state your name and any affiliation with an organization you may be representing. If you have written copies of your comments, we would appreciate receiving a copy of them. We may question speakers if necessary to clarify or learn more about matters as they arise. After all the registered speakers have had an opportunity to comment, any registered speaker who could not previously be heard will be called upon to speak. In addition, anyone who did not register to speak or desires additional time to speak will have the opportunity to comment. Please remember that Division of Water Resources staff can be contacted after the hearing to address any additional questions or comments that you may have. Because a large number of people have requested to speak, it will be necessary to impose a time limit of 4 minutes. A member of the Division of Water Resources staff will be timing the comments and will state when you have 1 minute remaining to speak. We appreciate your cooperation with this time limit so that everyone who wishes to speak is able to do so. I will now call on the first speaker. The first speaker is Tom Vitaglione, and the person after that is Emily Donovan. So, Mr. Vitaglione, it's your turn to speak.
Thank you, madam. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay, I am Tom Vitaglione, Senior Fellow at NC Child, a statewide nonprofit organization that advocates for the well-being of children and their families. In 2019 in North Carolina, there were 810 infant deaths, over 700 fetal deaths, and thousands of miscarriages, all representing tragedies for North Carolina families. In addition, more than 9% of births were low birth weight, an impediment to child development and later grade level reading. All these negative outcomes are some of the worst in the nation. They are presented here because a growing body of research indicates that these outcomes are associated with even low levels of PFAS. In fact, protection from exposures to PFAS now appears as a recommendation in the North Carolina Perinatal Health Strategic Plan. The underlying causes of all these negative outcomes are complex, and PFAS exposures are just one cause. However, this cause can be mitigated by the EMC, and we request that the EMC act as aggressively as possible in this regard. NC Child does not have the expertise to suggest maximum levels of contamination. However, given the tragedies noted above, we recommend that the EMC set levels as low as technically possible for each PFAS and for the PFAS class as a whole. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Vitiglione. I will now call Emily Donovan, and after her will be Emily Sutton. Ms. Donovan?
Hi, good evening. I am a wife, a mother, and co-founder of Clean Cape Fear. I live in Leland, North Carolina, and my family and 300,000 of my closest neighbors were overexposed to toxic levels of PFAS for decades. We cannot afford one more drop of these chemicals in our water, soil, air, or food supplies. I'm grateful DEQ is finally addressing a lack of groundwater standards regarding fluorochemicals. However, only addressing individual and obsolete chemicals like PFOA and PFOS does not adequately address the scope of North Carolina's PFAS contamination crisis. We all know North Carolina is ground zero for some of the nation's worst PFAS contamination. We also know the scope of that contamination goes well beyond 2 chemicals no longer in commercial use. This is why DEQ needs to address PFAS as a class when setting any groundwater standards. North Carolinians should also be able to have complete confidence groundwater standards protect vulnerable populations. The science used to reach such decisions should be health-based, with endpoints factoring in breastfeeding, placental transfer, and body burdens from exposure pathways other than drinking water. Unfortunately, the current proposed groundwater rule for PFOA and PFOS of 70 parts per trillion does not use the most current evidence or best available science to protect North Carolina's children and other vulnerable populations, like mine, which have been overexposed for decades. It most certainly doesn't protect us from the hundreds of PFAS we know contaminate North Carolina groundwater supplies. Tonight, I am urging DEQ to act on PFAS as a class of highly toxic substances and set a health protective groundwater standard of 1 part per trillion as the total concentration for the sum of all PFAS. There is precedent for creating standards lower than PQL. There is ample evidence supporting this health-based standard, and we know the nation is watching us right now. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Donovan. The next person I'm calling is Emily Sutton, and after her will be Anna Vonderhaard. Ms. Sutton?
Hi, can you hear me?
You're a little quiet. Can you speak louder?
Yes, I will.
That
Hello,
sounds
members.
fine. That's good. Thank you.
Hello, members of the ENC and Department of Environmental Quality. My name is Emily Sutton, and I'm the Haw River Keeper for Haw River Assembly. This opportunity to provide input for our state's groundwater standard is one that does not happen often. The triennial review for groundwater standards has not happened in over a decade. For this reason, it is incredibly important to set the most protective standards for groundwater based on the growing list of scientific studies and known health impacts of industrial contaminants. North Carolina has become a focus of nationwide concern around drinking water contamination from PFAS compounds. We know that the source of these contaminations is from industrial pollution through wastewater effluent to surface waters, land application of contaminated biosolids, and through air emissions. All 3 of these pathways have significant risk of contaminating groundwater resources. The proposed groundwater standard of a combined 70 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS does nothing to address the PFAS contamination we are seeing across the state. Shorter chain PFAS compounds are contaminating surface water and groundwater through the Haw and Cape Fear River watersheds. Through data collected by the PFAS Testing Network and other academic researchers, we know that these shorter chain PFAS are also detected in high levels, often higher than PFOA and PFAS in groundwater. Testing for these contaminants in groundwater supplies is extremely costly for a homeowner. North Carolina cannot afford to wait to regulate PFAS compounds. Communities have been drinking contaminated water for decades and are continuing to be exposed every day. More research is being conducted to show the full extent of health impacts that these communities will continue to face. As other states begin to set protective standards, including sum totals for the class of PFAS, we may see these polluting industries begin to take advantage of weaker regulations in North Carolina. The science is clear. PFAS must be regulated as a class in order to protect these impacted communities. Compounds in this class of pollutants share similar health risks even at low detection levels. Based on the available science, a standard of no more than 20 parts per trillion for the sum of all PFAS would be most appropriate. The time is now for the Environmental Management Commission to address PFAS standards as a class. The Chemours consent order set a standard of 70 parts per trillion for the sum of all PFAS and no greater than 10 parts per trillion for individual PFAS compounds. As new testing methods for individual PFAS compounds are approved, this standard should continue to be applied as written. Haw River Assembly recommends.
Sorry, Ms. Sutton?
Yes.
You have 1 minute, Ms. Sutton. Thank you.
Okay. Haw River Assembly recommends that the EMC set a groundwater standard that reflects this Chemours consent order. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sutton. The next person to be heard is Anna Vonderhaard, and after that will be Connor Kippy. Ms. Vonderhaard?
There is no one of that name on the list of attendees I see. Everyone, when they logged into WebEx, sign in with your name. There are a number of call-in users. So Anna, if you are one of these call-in users and you're on your phone right now, if you will please press *3 on your phone, that will quote unquote raise your hand and I can see that it's you. And that same instruction goes for anyone else who wishes to speak who is logged in over the telephone.
Peter, do you see any hands raised?
No.
Well, we will call on her again at the end of the list of people. So thank you. The next one then will be Connor Kippy, and then after that will be Roberta Waddle. So Connor Kippy. I'm not hearing anyone.
Same situation here. I do not see a Connor Kippy on the list, and I don't see any call-in users with their hands up.
Okay. Then the next one is Roberta Waddle, and the person after that is Michael Waters. Roberta Waddle?
Yes, I will pass. And my husband later in the list, Floyd Waddle, will also pass.
Okay, I'm just making note of that. I see his name. He's down near the end. Okay, thank you, Mrs. Waddle. The next one is Michael Waters, and after that is Ellie Klein. Mr. Waters?
Hello, this is Michael Waters. I'm the founder of the Grays Creek Resident United Against PFAS in Our Wells and Rivers. I represent roughly 4,000 people in Robinson, Bladen, and Cumberland County with contaminated wells, groundwater wells. I must say that I basically concur with all three of the previous personnel statement. As a groundwater user living half a mile from the plant with 16 chemicals in my well, and knowing that the N30 group was the first 30 people around the plant that were tested for PFAS chemicals in their blood. All of them had PFAS. Right now, the PFAS limit by the North Carolina groundwater standards, and I know PFOA has a 2,000 part per trillion level, but PFAS has the practical quantitation limit, which is 2 or less. So you're actually raising the standard for PFAS by 68. Now, when you go across and look at everybody's blood around the region, every single one of them had PFAS exceeding the national standard. We were hoping that we could say the 153 that were tested, we would know the standards. I had the privilege today to have my first oncology appointment for leukemia. And I know it's caused by this water. Same with the diverticulitis, the thyroid issues, the cholesterol issues. And you are actually, I'm begging the EMC not to use the 70 part per trillion. If nothing else, not for the PFAS. Right now, you can go with a lower quantity. It's proven by science that these numbers are too high. It is killing people. We have not had an honest to God health assessment of the personnel around the plant, not given the 300,000 that live in the Wilmington base, but just around the plant. I know because our group meets with these people all the way around the plant. There's leukemia, there's multiple sclerosis, tons of autoimmune diseases, and it almost follows the air ban. So we're begging you that, one, the whole class should be looked at of PFAS, because there's 16 that we know of in our wells. I've had as many as 22. I was part of the pilot group test for the GAC system, so we saw what was in our wells. I have an air monitoring site from the state, so I see what's coming. So what we're looking at is that, you know, I understand there's a health advisory standard from EPA of 70, but it's too high. I mean, we know this based off our animals. Those numbers will come back sooner or later, but, you know, we are begging you as the victims. You know, it is clear the chemical companies don't care.
Mr. Waters.
Yes, ma'am.
I apologize, sir, but you have less than 1 minute, please.
Okay, it's clear. The notice of violation, we already know Chemours dumped illegally in Cumberland County from where they were building the granular activated carbon to protect the people in Wilmington, and it's already shown that that's a failure with the next notice violation. So based off historical facts, the numbers that are coming in for the PFAS levels still going into the river, please reconsider. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. I appreciate your comments. The next one is Ellie Klein, and after that is Brian Beauregard. Ms. Klein? Is Ms. Klein on the line?
There is not a, she's not on, and none of the call-in users have their hands raised.
Okay, we'll come back to that name at the end. The next one is Brian Beauregard, and after that is Dana Sargent. Brian Beauregard?
Same situation there. I don't see a Brian Beauregard, and no call-in users have their hands raised.
Okay. Dana Sargent is the next one, and after that is Grady McCauley. So, Ms. Sargent, are you available?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Dana Sargent, and I'm the Executive Director of Cape Fear River Watch, a nonprofit in Wilmington working to protect and improve the water quality in the Cape Fear Basin. Before providing my comments regarding the proposed standard, I feel it's necessary to amplify an important point made by Southern Environmental Law Center in comments submitted to the state on our behalf on a related issue. And that is, the primary tool under the Clean Water Act for eliminating discharges is the technology-based effluent limit. Chemours' own research has shown that technology already installed on the site can reduce almost all PFAS to such low levels that they are not detectable. Technology-based effluent limits are the minimum level of control that must be imposed in a permit, to quote the law. EMC's final designation on groundwater standards and any future designations of surface water standards excuse me, should not preclude DEQ from adhering to federal law and setting technology-based effluent limits, the level of which has been shown to be, for most PFAS, lower than the detection limit. Regarding the proposed groundwater limit for PFOA and PFOS, first, it should be amplified that the obsolete interim level of 2,000 for PFOA was created 15 years ago. The fact that this has not been reviewed in all that time is unlawful and dangerous. A process to ensure this doesn't happen again needs to be addressed in this rulemaking. North Carolina residents in the Cape Fear region alone have been exposed for more than 40 years to at least 300 unique PFAS. We are proposing a limit based on research adhered to by other states that are far ahead of North Carolina in taking action, even with exposures that don't compare nearly to ours. Groundwater rulemaking does not accommodate a class approach, which anyone following this issue knows is the only approach that makes sense. And listening to Mike Waters sharing that he has been diagnosed with leukemia, along with hearing all of the other sicknesses documented from folks drinking contaminated well water, as well as surface water, it's clear that the limit should be 0, which brings me back to the effluent limit I discussed. But for this rule, EMC should consider changing the rule to address toxic chemicals like PFAS as a class. But due to the immediacy of this issue, in the meantime, EMC should set a limit of 20 parts per trillion combined for PFOA, PFOS, and a set of 5 indicator PFAS. The regulation of this subset would be feasible, and the PFAS selected should be representative of the greater class of PFAS in our environment. Internal documents dating back to 1950 show DuPont, 3M, and then Chemours knew of the health and environmental risks that PFAS pose, yet they continue to manufacture and inject them into consumer products and release them unchecked into our environment and our bodies. Mothers have contaminated their unborn babies with PFAS and then unknowingly poisoned them further through what should be the most natural act of breastfeeding. Cancer rates continue to increase for firefighters and communities with high exposure rates, while industry continues to bank millions in profit. Countless people have died over a span of 40 years because of this recklessness of not only manufacturers, but of regulators. Any of you who choose not to act with all that you know now will be complicit in this travesty. To be clear, industry must be regulated immediately. It's up to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sargent. The next person on the list is Grady McCauley, and after that is Hope Taylor. Mr. McCauley?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
You're a little quiet, but it's clear.
I will move closer. Thank you.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I am Grady McCauley. I'm Policy Director at the North Carolina Conservation Network, and I really appreciate the chance to offer our thoughts verbally this evening. We will be submitting more detailed technical comments in the weeks to come. I'll speak mostly about the perfluorinated compound proposal, but I do want to note that as the staff presentation indicated, this package includes also changes to increase transparency and ensure sounder science in the setting of interim maximum allowable concentrations, interim groundwater standards. We support those changes. With respect to the portion of the package that addresses PFOS and PFOA, I think it's worth saying up front that if the EMC does nothing else and the division, it's most crucial to repeal the PFOA interim standard that dates back to 2006 and sets it at 2,000 parts per trillion, which is grossly obsolete and not in keeping with the science now. It might be enough simply to withdraw that, to remove that, and go to the practical quantitation limit on everything else. I will say we are concerned that if the EMC sets a standard as proposed for the sum of PFOS and PFOA at 70, that is effectively weaker than the trigger that was used around the Chemours site to determine that households would receive water treatment filters, the 10 of any one PFAS and 70 of the sum of measurable PFAS. We are worried that that would effectively undermine that level of protection to have a final groundwater standard, as has been proposed. We appreciate that in the consent order was intended to be protective. It was not a health-based standard, and that to set a standard, you need to adhere to 0202D. We think the science, as has been relied on in other states, justifies setting a standard for PFOS or PFOA or both at 8 or 10 or 13 or 16 or the sum less than 20. And we'll discuss that in more detail in our written technical comments. But I want to note that if the EMC chooses to do that for just PFOS and PFOA and not to take a class approach, it's really important that the testing methods when groundwater is tested include a broader set, because we know that perfluorinated compounds travel together, as has been mentioned. PFOS and PFOA rarely show up in a well by themselves. They often have another PFAS with them. And it's one thing to have the PFAS, those other PFAS effectively at the practical quantitation limit because they don't have a groundwater standard, but that doesn't actually provide any protection unless when groundwater is tested, it's tested for a suite of PFAS. So it's important that if the EMC ends up just setting the standard for PFOS and PFOA, that it makes sure that groundwater is being tested for the full suite of PFAS. But as others have said, what would really be most appropriate is a class approach. It's not clear to me that you can do that under 0202D as it is written. And so in our written technical comments, yes.
Mr. McCauley, you have 1 minute, please, sir.
Thank you. In our written comments, we'll discuss how you might approach that in adding a new subsection 0202E and pushing everything else in the rule down a little bit. We'll discuss how you might consider adding language so that this rule is actually able to grapple with a class, as Massachusetts has with the sum of PFAS under 20, or a total approach as is used for chlorines and chloramines and disinfection byproducts, or other more focused approaches that might be appropriate for North Carolina. With that, I'll close, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. McCauley. The next person is Hope Taylor, and after that, Jennifer Hill Kerrigan. Ms. Taylor?
Yes, I'm Hope Taylor. Yes?
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm Hope Taylor, Executive Director of Clean Water for North Carolina, a nonprofit working for environmental justice and health for all North Carolina communities with members in over 60 North Carolina counties. Since our beginnings in 1984, we have worked with communities impacted by Superfund and other toxic sites where groundwater contamination is the principal driver of potential human health risk. We do support the tabular format for listing of standards, and we strongly support the use of the chemical abstract service numbers for each contaminant as reducing ambiguity, as well as the inclusion of contaminants such as 2,6-dinitrotoluene and strontium in the list here. But we will be submitting strong comments, strong technical comments in the near future. And most of my comments are going to be associated with PFAS compounds. During 2005 to 2007, while we were also working with the state's environmental health directors and legislative allies to advocate for statewide county level well programs and funding to provide safe replacement water for low-income residents dependent on private wells, we were also working to stop production of the first PFAS produced in North Carolina, known as C8 or PFOA, at DuPont's Fayetteville Works in collaboration with downwind residents and local religious congregations. We met repeatedly with DENR staff from several divisions and called for strong standards and full accountability for the contamination of North Carolina's water and air and the high blood levels found in DuPont workers within months of PFAS production starting at DuPont. But we only got weak enforcement on groundwater violations. Once the Environmental Management Commission had passed the IMAC of 2,000 parts per trillion, all the groundwater monitoring, or just about all of it, disappeared because that standard was so weak. It was one of the worst things that happened to accountability at or around the DuPont site. Along with local advocates, we kept high pressure on both DuPont and EPA until an environmental stewardship agreement was signed between DuPont and EPA to phase out the production of PFOA. However, that agreement, as we all know, allowed DuPont and its later offshoot Chemours to produce other PFAS, about which there was even less health data available. And North Carolina's waters, people, and fisheries have paid the price. The consent decree signed by DEQ and Chemours recently doesn't go far enough to protect North Carolinians or residents in many communities across the U.S. From PFAS compounds being used pardon me?
Ms. Taylor, you have 1 minute, please.
Okay, great. In dozens of industrial applications to perform luxury functions such as stain resistance and non-stick properties. Clean Water for North Carolina believes there is no excuse to allow the continued production for profit of compounds that have no necessity in our economy and have a range of adverse health impacts and are extremely persistent in the environment. While the consent order is too weak to accomplish what's really needed to protect our human and environmental health, it does provide a somewhat more protective standard that is 10 micrograms per liter for each PFAS compound rather than the 70 for PFOA and PFOS combined. The 2L standard must be at least this strong. And Linda Birnbaum, former director of NIEHS, has pointed to National Toxicology Program data showing adverse health effects as low as 0.1 parts per trillion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. The next person to be called is Jennifer Kerrigan, and after that, Lior Varad. Ms. Kerrigan?
I don't see a Jennifer Kerrigan, nor do any of the call-in users have their hands up.
All right, we'll call on her after we're through the rest of the people. The next one is Lior Varad, and after that is Brian Jones. Is Mr. Varad on the line?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sorry.
Hello, members of the Environmental Management Commission and the Department of Environmental Quality. I thank you for the opportunity to speak on this very important issue. My name is Dr. Lior Varad, and I am the policy advocate for Toxic Free North Carolina, a North Carolina-based environmental organization specializing in toxics. I am here to advocate for a combined groundwater standard of 20 parts per trillion or lower for the sum of PFOA, PFOS, and all PFAS detectable by a certified lab method. Different PFAS often travel together and are found in mixtures in groundwater. Recent scientific studies in mixtures raise concerns about cumulative and synergetic effects between different long-chain PFAS. Additionally, long-chain PFAS bioaccumulate, increasing the risk for cumulative effects. The science suggests that class regulation is needed. Several states have already taken a class regulatory approach to PFAS, and we strongly urge North Carolina to do the same. We also advocate for a lower standard since the US EPA 70 parts per trillion standard was based on a pharmacokinetic model that assumed dosimetry between mother and infant. When a pharmacokinetic model that takes into account lactation and placental transfer was used on the same lowest observed adverse effect level used by the EPA, the resulting standard was much lower. Several states took these new findings into account when determining their new standards for PFOS and PFOA. Based on this new pharmacokinetic model, we recommend a standard of 20 parts per trillion or lower. I thank the Environmental Management Commission and the Department of Environmental Quality for the opportunity to speak and urge you to adopt a combined 20 parts per trillion or lower standard for the sum of PFOA, PFOS, and all PFAS measured by a certified lab technique. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Varad. The next person to be called is Brandon Jones, and after that is Corey Bell. Brandon Jones? Is it Brandon Jones on the line?
Brandon is not on the list.
Thank you. We'll call for him again afterwards. The next one, as I said, is Corey Bell, and after that is Manny Mayfield. Corey Bell?
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Great. Good evening, I'm Corey Bell, a water advocate at the Natural Resources Defense Council. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed amended groundwater standards today. My comments will focus on the proposed PFAS standards. While we're glad to see that the proposed standards attempt to address the state's PFAS problem, the proposed standards are not enough. There are over 9,000 different PFAS currently in existence, and hundreds of different PFAS have been found in the water in North Carolina. For this reason, we urge the Division of Water Resources to set a standard for PFAS as a class, instead of a standard that addresses just 2 of the 9,000 plus PFAS. In addition to setting a class, or at the very least a subclass standard, the division is also required to set limits which do not create a threat to human health. The proposed standard of 70 parts per trillion does just that. Instead, the division should set the combined standard at the lowest, most health protective level, which is well below 70 parts per trillion, as PFAS are persistent, bioaccumulate, and can be toxic in even very small concentrations. In addition to being protective of human health and the environment, a lower standard that addresses the class, or at least a subclass of PFAS, is the most efficient and fiscally responsible way to address these toxic chemicals. Thank you again for the opportunity to comment today.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. The next person is Manny Mayfield, and after that is Brendan and Regina O'Donnell. Mr. Mayfield, are you on the line?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening. How you doing?
Just fine.
I just want to say my name is Manny Mayfield. I've been a resident of the Graves Creek area for about, it'll be a year actually on the 14th of this month. And just within the last year, learning about the contamination in the well water here and within my own well here at my house, and then seeing the changes in my two kids' body, dermatology issues and things of that nature. Having to spend money to have a sufficient water treatment system put in to purify the water, because the RO system that is offered under the consent order is just insignificant. It doesn't address the fact that you have residents, individuals, human beings still bathing in contaminated water, which will lead to some of the health issues that have already been discussed. So it is just, I just submit to the members here that to raise it to 70 parts per trillion just is unacceptable. And, I'm not as well versed as some of the other individuals that are partaking on this call. However, I'm in favor of 20 parts per trillion, or if not less, because just the health effects alone on individuals that have been here for years and decades is just it's just unfathomable. I've lived all around the United States, all around the world, actually. And, to come here to North Carolina, as people have said, this is a hub of, the PFAS, the PFOA contamination. And, the more and more that I learn and, hear how this has been going on, it's just mind boggling that we're even at this point. It's 2021 and this has been going on for 40 plus years. Not to mention it has happened in West Virginia, it has happened in Ohio. And I believe that North Carolina should adopt stricter standards, revise the consent order, and make it to where, residents actually have, clean drinking water, water that is safe for them and their families. And with that, I end my remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayfield. The next one on the list is Brent O'Donnell. Are they on the line?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Certainly can, thank you.
My name is Brendan O'Donnell. I'm with my wife, Regina, and we are residents of the city of Wilmington. Of course, our lives have been personally touched by this issue because of the contamination of our drinking water via the Cape Fear River by the Comores dumping, which is now apparently continues despite the attention it's got in the news and attention it's got from regulatory agencies. We have, like many people in the city, purchased a reverse osmosis treatment filter for our drinking water, but we can't afford a whole house filter, and we're still showering and bathing in this water. And we are advocating that the DEQ set the standard as low as possible. Would like to echo the comments of the prior speaker who made some excellent points, as well as Emily Donovan, who started out from Clean Cape Fear. And I would like to reserve the rest of my time for my wife, Regina.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Regina. I'm a nurse practitioner at what was New Hanover Medical Center until yesterday, now Novant Health. And I work with the palliative care service there. I see a lot of sick people who are very sick. But what's striking over the years since I've been here, 12 years now, are the number of very young people with cancer in their 20s and 30s who, as I heard today, a mother crying out to me, why is my 30-year-old daughter with a 3-year-old dying of cancer? Why is this happening? And she was the second one this week. This is not supposed to happen. I am a cancer survivor. My husband is struggling with a rare type of cancer. This should not be happening. And we are also part of the NC State study on forever chemicals. I charted off the charts with 12 different chemicals in my blood, and I don't think I deserve that. I think we all deserve to be able to drink clean water. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. O'Donnell. Appreciate your comments. The last one we have on the list is Claire O'Donnell. Is she on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
You're a little faint. Can you speak louder?
Can you hear me better there?
I think so. Peter, can you hear her okay?
Yes, well enough.
Okay. Yes, Claire O'Donnell here. I'm Regina and Brendan's daughter, and I live in Wilmington as well. I'd like to stay here and, raise children close to my parents, but I can't in good conscience raise children on water that's contaminated with unhealthy levels of toxic chemicals. I agree with what many have said, that PFAS should be regulated as a class, and that 1 part per trillion would be generous for the total PFAS and the groundwater standard. Yeah, it would be great if you could show me and my family that you value our lives and the lives of North Carolinians, that you believe in science and are prepared to do your job to ensure a livable environment for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. O'Donnell. We really appreciate your time and trying to give us your comments. Thank you very much. I'm going back through the list for the people that were not on the line before. The first one is Anna Vonderhaard. Is an Anna Vonderhaard on the line?
No.
Is a Connor Kippy on the line?
No.
The next one I had was Ellie Klein.
Not here.
The next one is Brian Beauregard.
Also not here.
Jennifer Hill Kerrigan.
Jennifer is not here.
Brandon Jones.
There was a call-in user number 12 with their hand up, so I will go ahead and unmute that person. If you would please let us know who you are.
Hi, this is Brandon Jones. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you quite well. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
Excellent. My name is Brandon Jones. I am the Catawba River Keeper at the Catawba River Keeper Foundation. I represent over 5,000 members across the Catawba watershed. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on these important standards. In general, we're supportive of the proposed changes, particularly the increase in transparency for the new interim limits. We also appreciate the department's acknowledgement of the need to update the grossly outdated standard for PFOA and the addition of PFOS. However, the proposed regulations are insufficient to protect our groundwater for current and future generations. These chemicals are part of a larger class of persistent chemicals, referred to as PFAS. There are now thousands of chemicals within this class, and more that are developed each year. Few have been adequately studied. Those that have, particularly C8, are linked to several types of cancer. Rather than adopt this inadequate standard, we urge the EMC to adopt a new groundwater standard that is at least as strong as those put in place to protect citizens through the Camorra's consent order. We recommend a standard of no more than 10 parts per trillion for any single PFAS, and no more than 70 parts per trillion for the sum of all PFAS, not just PFOS or PFOA, but all of them within the class. Based on the best available science, we also recommend a standard of no more than 20 parts per trillion for the sum of all PFAS. We believe that would be the most appropriate. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Are there any additional comments? You can raise your hand. I know there's quite a few attendees on the line. Peter, do you see anybody else raising their hands?
Yes, we have a Christopher Lehue. Christopher, I'll go ahead and unmute you now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Thank you.
My name is Christopher Lehue. I'm also a resident of Grace Creek community here in Cumberland County. I'm part of the Grace Creek Resident United Against PFAS in our wells and water with Mike Waters. I live just down the road from DuPont. I'm 47 years old. I've been in triathlons. I'm an avid runner. I was on SWAT team with the sheriff's office for years, and I'm diabetic, cholesterol, and other medical issues as well. Our fight in this is growing. More people are joining it every day. We will not go away. We demand the rule of the law to be followed. You know, being enforcing the law. It's not hard. You just have to do it. It's simple. The law is the law. Dying. The health study on PFAS now will solidify our stand. Fight. Treat us like humans. Treat us like, you know, you would treat your own family. We're not man better. We're going to keep fighting and demand better for ourselves and our family and the future generations. Basically, that's all I have to say, and I thank you for giving me the time.
Mr. Lehue, are you finished with your comments?
Yes, ma'am. I say finish, and thank you for giving me the time.
Yes, we appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. Peter, are there any other hands that are raised?
Yes, we have a Beth Marquisino. Beth, you are unmuted now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're very clear.
All right, thank you. My name is Beth Marquisino, and I am the president of North Carolina Stop Gen X in Our Water. We are a large nonprofit organization, and we represent the community of North Carolina. I am out in the Grace Creek, Fayetteville area all the time. Myself and Mike Waters, we are community members that have been affected by these chemicals. And I really want to speak to the heart of the matter. I have been affected by these chemicals. My son Samuel has passed away. These chemicals bioaccumulate in your system. These chemicals, I'm sorry, I get a little emotional because my son is dead. And PFOA and PFOS has really wreaked havoc in my system. And I had placenta problems during my pregnancy, and because of that, my son did not get enough amniotic fluid, and his kidneys, bladder, and bowel did not develop, and I had to give birth to him early. and he passed away. And, you know, my son is dead, like I said. I also had to have a full hysterectomy after that because I kept getting cysts the size of oranges. You're not supposed to have cysts the size of oranges in your body. And that's another sign of these chemicals because they're endocrine disruptors. You know, so I've had a full hysterectomy and I'm only 40 years old. I've also had a partial thyroidectomy. I keep having all of these parts of my body removed, and I'm not a human toy to be played with these chemicals, and that's what Chemours and DuPont, they treat us like this. They use our water and our air as profit for themselves with these chemicals. And the thing is that DEQ has known since 2003, and that's 18 years. They've known about PFOA and PFOS in our water. And in 2009, the EPA signed a consent order with DuPont, and so these chemicals they should have been stopped back then, and so you know we are finding out that you know these chemicals are in our blood, they're in our soil, they're in our food, and the honey around the Chemours plant, and so I just really want to, yeah.
You have 1 minute.
Oh, okay, thank you. I mean, I just really just want to lead this, you know, end this with, we really want these chemicals out of our drinking water, out of our air, and we want the groundwater standard to be the lowest as possible, anywhere from 1 part per trillion to 7 parts per trillion. And we want DEQ fighting for our communities. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is there anybody else with hand raised?
There was someone identified as call-in user number 18. You are now unmuted.
Would you please state your name and affiliation?
Yes, I am Manuel Fort. No affiliation. I'm a resident at Hope Mills. Mike Waters is a good friend of mine. Mr. Scott LaHue is also a good friend of mine. I am retired, active duty military, served several deployments, and upon doing so, we built our house here in North Carolina, Grays Creek area, with the intent that this would be our dream home. I could finally relax from multiple deployments and raise our family. After building our house in August 20,
I can't hear you, Mr. Fort.
help with the entire were deployed in our country.
You're coming in and out, Mr. Fort. We can't get all your words, and we are recording this. Could you try something else?
I'll try.
Peter, can you hear him?
No, he's still unmuted, but I can't hear.
Can anyone hear me?
Mr. Fort, I just hear a word every once in a while. Can you call in again and maybe it'll be a better connection?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'll try that.
And so in the meantime, when he's calling in, Peter, should we try, is there somebody else with their hand up?
There are a couple of folks, but they have already spoken.
Can you tell if Mr. Ford has called back in yet?
All right, I've unmuted him again.
Yeah. Well,
I can't hear anything. Mr. Ford, are you on speaker or something? I'm afraid we're not hearing anything from Mr. Ford. Perhaps you could send in some written comments, since we can't hear you and we've got the information on the screen. Peter, should we go to the next person?
Yes, there is a call-in user 16 with their hand up, who is now unmuted.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Katie Bryant. I'm actually the founder of Clean Haw River out of Pittsburgh, North Carolina, and I represent over 4,000 residents here who are being contaminated by upstream municipalities. We have Reedsville, Greensboro, and Burlington, all contributors to this. I'm fairly new to this issue, and I'm trying my hardest to understand how in the world this could happen to water drinkers. But I wanted to just start off by saying I agree with previous callers, Emily Donovan, Emily Sutton, that this needs to be changed to a class regulation. It needs to be 1 parts per trillion, and I'll explain why. First, though, I wanted to remind you, DEQ, thank you so much for even having this and allowing us to speak. And I just want to remind you of your mission, which I'm reading off of your website, which is providing science-based environmental stewardship for the health and prosperity of all North Carolinians. And somehow I'm sitting here arguing over something that I'm drinking that has no science-based safety at all. There is no science telling me that any regulation of this, any level over 1 parts per trillion or 0.01 is safe for me and my children. And I'm sure you can hear the hostility in my voice right now because it's real. It's already affecting my family. It's already affecting my community, the people that I love. Just last week, I had several people calling me, asking me why their babies are so small and why they can't have children. And their blood levels are ridiculous. They're in the Duke study. Their blood levels for the PFAS chemicals that they've been monitored are far above national standards. They are so far above, and I implore you to look at the data. If you want it, I will send it to you. You can reach out to Duke. Heather Stapleton has it. It shows that our community we need somebody to care about us. We need someone to do what's right. On top of PFAS, we have other chemicals in our water. 1,4-dioxane is an extremely high level. So to say that you can only regulate 2 chemicals and that you're going to do it at anything other than less than 1 is just preposterous when you can't tell me what all of these things are doing to me. Until then, I would say keeping it at the lowest level possible is the best thing for all North Carolinians, people that come and visit, drink our water, swim in our river, that the Haw River Keeper tries really hard to speak for. And we're not safe, and nobody's doing anything. Just now, our town finally started to take measures. There are residents, 4,000 residents, and I only know of a handful that know what's going on because nobody's sharing information, which to me is a complete and utter lie. The state needs to do what's right. I do, yes?
Ms. Bryant, you have 1 minute, please, ma'am.
Okay, I'll just end with saying, again, please, please consider regulating this where it should. We have more than just PFAS chemicals, 5,000 chemicals in our water, potentially, and we need to keep it at the lowest possible level. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bryant. Peter, does anyone else have their hand raised?
Yes. There are two others. There's a call-in user 12, but I think that was Brandon Jones who already spoke. Call-in user 12, have you spoken yet?
Yes, I forgot to unraise my hand. Sorry about that.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, there is, this is call-in user 19, and I'm going to unmute you now, and if you would please tell us your name.
Hi, this is Manuel Ford again. My apologies for earlier.
We can hear you much better so far. Thank you for calling back and trying again.
Yes, ma'am, and thank you for the opportunity to speak again. And this isn't intended to be a scolding at DEQ whatsoever. All I'm simply asking is that many of us did our jobs overseas deployed with the expectations that we were to keep the enemy at bay, eliminate any threats, anything that is threatening to the country. And while we were there, we rely on everyone back in the States to do their jobs. And when we come back home, especially on retirement, and find out that we have an insider threat in the form of a chemical that's in the water that we use all the time for everything, that was really disheartening. And thinking that we could come home, mainly speaking in my situation, that we could come home and relax, put all those things behind us, just to find out that now this threat is affecting your family. Because my wife just recently got diagnosed, and the other people listening know this to be true, just got diagnosed with diverticulitis, where I had to sit with her in the ER, figure out our kids, and we've had multiple animals die with mysterious legions. And some of these animals, yes, we've had them time. Some of these animals, we've had them for a very short time, and we've spent thousands of dollars taking a small little hamster to a vet just so that it can live a little bit longer. And so all I'm simply asking is that you look at this as a possible threat to human life and base your calculations on whether or not you think those numbers are worth that risk. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for trying again for the third time. Peter, are there any more hands raised?
All right, I'm doing one final check here. A couple folks have their hands up, but all of them have already been called on, so there is no one new.
Okay. Since there are no more comments, I declare the hearing closed. The hearing record will remain open until March 16, 2021. That means that any time between today and close of business on March 16, 2021, anyone can submit further comments on the proposed rules in writing to Ms. Shelton. Written comments received by U.S. mail or by email during this time period will be made a part of the public record. The public notice announcement and the last slide of the presentation have both the addresses for your reference. After the comment period has ended on March 16, Division of Water Resources staff and I will review the comments and prepare a report of proceedings, including all the comments. Then we will make a recommendation to the Environmental Management Commission. The Commission will make a decision regarding the proposal after consideration of the report of proceedings. As I noted earlier, the Commission may not make substantial changes in the final rules without renotice and rehearing. If the commission adopts the proposed rules, then the expected effective date for the rules would be July 1, 2021. We thank everyone for attending this online hearing and offering your comments. That's the end of the hearing. Peter, are we